Alright, I'm just finishing getting everything set up right now, but hi, my name is Alex. If you're new here, I'm a non-binary and autistic author from the Pacific Northwest. I have a short story collection, I have a sapphic fantasy dark academia novel that I released last year, and I'm currently working on a sapphic seafaring fantasy novel about two women who go across the world to save it, four married, and it ends incredibly tragically, as told as the eulogy at one of their funerals. So that's the thing I'm working on right now. And so I've been kind of streaming the process, streaming my research for doing that, and just kind of trying to keep tabs on it. I fell off for a few months because I was involved in the Boeing strike against IM751 Union, and so I was out of a job for a while, and then I got a second job, and then I came back to Boeing, and I maintained both jobs for a while, and was just super busy and wanted to die, and I didn't have time for streaming, so unfortunately I just had to let this fall to the side for a few months, but I have since left out of the job, and I have a lot more free time on my hands, so I'm hoping to start making this a more regular thing. And so I did do a stream a couple weeks ago. I ended up privating that video because of some of the things that have been talked about in it, but hoping to just kind of rehash some of the not privated things in this stream, and then I kind of wanted to I have a video that I want to watch and take notes on, and then probably do some writing sprints if I still have time. It is an hour-long video, and especially if I'm pausing a lot to take notes, I don't know how much time I'll end up having at the end, but we'll kind of see where it goes. Because first, I wanted to talk a bit about my YouTube and writing plans for 2025 and moving forward. Because I've been using this channel a lot for just doing research streams and sprints, and sometimes talking about my writing process, and I've been trying to kind of be more efficient with where I'm at and how I'm using it. So, for example, I haven't deleted them, but I've removed the apps for Instagram and for Facebook off of my phone because I realized I was doom scrolling way too much, and I may do the same thing with Reds even. And so I've stopped making posts on them, I've stopped using them almost entirely, and because they just weren't serving me. I was on TikTok for a second, and then the whole ban and unban happened, and I just don't feel comfortable going back there, and I'm a bit too wordy for the, like, minute, 3 minute, 10 minute kind of restrictions that TikTok imposes on people, I feel, and so it's a bit too difficult to kind of truncate myself down into those chunks, basically, in order to get big on TikTok. So I decided ultimately, the ban and unban helped, of course, but I ultimately decided that I'm just not gonna waste the time there. And so I have Blue Sky, which is a Twitter alternative that came out, I think 2 years ago, and I've been using that for a while, and I like it a lot. Excuse me, I'm getting over a cold. So I'm using Blue Sky, and then I want to use YouTube, and then my newsletter to kind of... Ultimately, I kind of want to do this thing where I write out essays, and then I make, like, video accompaniments to them on here. I think that would be cool. And then another thing that I want to start doing more is planning out segments, because it's something that I see some people do. I see, like, Dead Domain do this, where they'll do a stream on a topic, and then they truncate it down into a more reasonably sized video from that feed, and plus some B-roll footage and whatnot. And so I'm hoping to maybe start doing something along those lines, where, you know, I come in with, like, hey, I have this topic I want to talk about today, and then, you know, I do a stream kind of going over it, I cut out all the filler bits, and then I make it into some kind of workable video. I don't know yet. And then another thing I want to do with these streams specifically is I do want to do more games, specifically from the lens of, like, role-playing as characters from my books, or kind of going over media that has inspired my own works. So for example, I call it Malta WIP, it's also called The Distance Between Stars and Salt. That book, one of the main inspirations for it is a game called Legend of Zelda Wind Waker. And so it'd be really cool to do a playthrough of that game on the channel, and, you know, talk about places where it's inspired me, where I've taken inspiration, how I've adapted certain things. And then another one is Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Explorers the Sky. That one's gonna be harder because just thinking about the game makes me want to cry, and I definitely would cry a lot playing that game, even by myself. So that one would be a little more difficult, but then I also want to do, like, Pokemon Nuzlocks. I've been talking on Blue Sky about I really want to do a Nuzlocke of Black and White and Black and White 2 in sequence. I have to get the emulator figured out, though, because for whatever reason, the ROM I downloaded works in English on my phone, but then when I open up the emulator on my computer, it plays it in... It doesn't quite look like Spanish, so I think it's Portuguese. And I can't figure out why, because the language settings are in English, the ROM is in English, I checked it through my phone, so I am not entirely sure what the problem is there, but I have to figure that out. But also Black and White and Black and White 2 are probably the hardest like, ROM hack Pokemon games to nuzlocke, because the difficulty curve is pretty severe. So I was probably going to start out with something easier like Platinum. But again, I have to get the emulator figured out before I start devoting myself to any of that, so... But I want to do Wind Waker playthrough, I want to do an Explorers of Sky playthrough, probably very slowly so I don't just bawl my eyes out continuously. Pokemon Nuzlocks, and then more like MMO content, probably play more Skyrim, because I did a Skyrim playthrough a couple times, like way back. And probably, I think the earliest streams that I have here, I did an Ion playthrough, and I really want to get back to Ion, because I really like it. Maybe EverQuest 2 at some point, I don't know. I just want to, like, share things, and, like, things that inspire my writing process. And so that's kind of what I'm thinking, or how I'm thinking of taking things further, into 2025. So, excuse me. I'm probably going to be coughing a bit during this, but we're just going to do our best. So yeah, that's kind of my plans for 2025, and I just kind of wanted to go over that up front at the top, just because, you know, it's kind of like the future of this channel, so, but now, like I said, I do have a video I want to watch and take notes on, and I'll kind of explain why when I open it. And then also, today is SAPPHIC Stuff Your Kindle Day, with Year of Queer Lit, and I actually need to add that to the, description notes, because, I need to share the link for it. So yes, Stuff Your Kindle events are big events in the author community, where people, discount their books very temporarily, and you can get them for free or for 99 cents, and it's really good for authors to get their book out there and for people to, like, buy them and read them. And so I took part in one for SAPPHIC books. I put in my novel A Sharper, More Lasting Pain, which is about 3 casters at a magic college as a monstrous tragedy unfolds around them and ruins their lives. And so I submitted that one, and this is pretty cool. I'm gonna pull it up and show it off super quickly, because I was like, no fucking way. So I don't like looking at Amazon, but somebody today was talking about their own Amazon rankings on one of their books in the SAPPHIC, Stuff Your Kindle event, right? And so I pulled up mine just kind of out of curiosity, and where's the page? I am number 1 right now in LGBTQ fiction. I'm also number 4 in dark fantasy horror, which is pretty cool. And I am number... Oh, that went up a couple steps, I think. Oh, it went up a lot of steps. I'm number 112 right now in free in the Kindle store listings. So that's pretty fucking neat. And I'm really happy with that. So I just thought that was a really cool tidbit to share. Because it's not often that I hit rankings at all. So, I just wanted to show that off for a second, and also mention, SAPPHIC Stuff Kindle is going on right now. I included a link in the description. It's actually there now, so you can check that out. You can download a bunch of books, including mine, for free, or for 99 cents, or at least, like, discounted from what they were. So check it out if you like sapphic fiction, and, especially fantasy or romance. There's a lot of good, entries in there. I think there's like 150 listed on the website, of different books and authors and whatnot, so I just kind of wanted to touch on that for a second. So now, the thing that I would like to take notes on today is this. So I had to look up who Anthony Horowitz is. He's done a fair amount of writing. He's done writing for Sherlock Holmes, for James Bond. He's done some journalism, some theater work, and then he's wrote for television and film. So I thought that was pretty neat. But the reason that this is important is because a while ago I'm trying to find information on the state of literature, the state of fiction, especially in the country of Malta, because Malta is where The Distance Between Stars and Salt is mainly inspired by, at least the first area. They go across the world, and there's other countries they run into that aren't Maltese inspired, but their home of Ilzadina is. And so I've been doing a bunch of research. I did stream a lot of that research that I ended up doing, and for a while I've been trying to like find Maltese people online and join. I joined a Facebook group for a second that is a writing group in Malta, and I just kind of sit in the corner and watch them talk. I haven't gotten a whole lot out of them yet, but I'm hopeful. But so I've been trying to find like what I guess writing trends are in Malta, kind of what they're looking for in books set in Malta. And I really was sad because I wanted to watch this one, because a lot of these videos, if they're in Maltese, the title is in Maltese, and then the ones in English, the titles are in English. Seemed to be the convention. So I saw this one where it says Maltese fiction, where to next? From their Maltese Book Festival last year, and I clicked it, and it is all in Maltese, and I don't speak the language, and so I was very sad because I was really looking forward to watching that one and taking notes on it. But alas, we're here now. It is what it is. So instead, we're going to be watching this one because it was at that same festival last year, the Malta Book Festival 2024, and so I may learn something from this one. I may not. It may just be a talk that Anthony Horowitz is having in Malta. Either way, though, I thought it would be just kind of cool, and so I'm going to be watching it and taking notes and probably pausing on occasion to like make commentary on it. So let me get that set up. Oh, let's have Also, if you like the music, it is in the description below. So I'm just going to turn that up to like there, and we're gonna hit play. Turn on closed captions.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much indeed for coming here. Can I start by saying how very happy I am to have had a lovely couple of days in Malta. Apart from the rain, it is such a beautiful place to come and visit, with so many wonderful pieces of architecture and a story at every single corner. And I'm so grateful to have been invited to this event. It's billed as the world of writing, a creative writing masterclass. And when the organizers first invited me, they said, would I do a masterclass? I said, yes, I'd be happy to. And they said, well, how many people do you like to have in the group? And I said, well, 10 to 15 is normally about the correct number, at which time you can actually sort of get to know everybody and get to sort of the absolute nitty-gritty of writing. Well, as you can see, you are rather more than that. So I have, as Simone just said, have written a completely new speech, which is why I have to have notes in front of me. Normally I talk without them. And also I have no idea how long this is going to go on for. I'm told I have to stop in an hour, so shout at me if I'm getting over. I want to leave at least 10, 15 minutes for questions, so maybe in 45 minutes' time, somebody can let me know that it is time for that. As you've probably guessed by now, I talk very quickly. If I'm talking too fast and you're
quickly enough for me, unfortunately, I tend to watch videos on 1.5 times speed. And sometimes people still talk too slow, and I have to turn them up even more. But still.
not able to follow me for either linguistic or whatever reason.
Also, I tend to be told by people in my life that I talk way too fast. In fact, I'm probably talking a bit too fast here, and I'm trying to be conscionable about it and try and like force myself to slow down. It's difficult though.
Shout at me and I'll try and slow down, although I have a lot to get through. And also, because there are a lot of you, I do have to ask a few questions of you, just so I get an idea of what I should or shouldn't be talking about. For example, how many people in this room have been published? How many published writers? So we have a large number of people who know probably more about writing than I do. That's the first thing to say. And who is here because they are actually literally interested in the sort of, in improving their work, in writing and selling in books? Again, that's what this is aimed at. That is exactly what this is about. So I'm glad.
I would be very surprised if I was in that room and somebody did not raise their hand, not gonna lie.
See so many hands go up. And just one last question, which is sort of more embarrassing in a way. Can you be honest with you? How many people in this room have not actually read a single book or work written by me?
I would be raising my hand at that one because, like I said before this masterclass, I had to look up who this guy was, and he's had his hands in pretty big IPs. So,
Okay, a few hands going up, including I noticed my agent, which is really rather worrying there. But still. Okay, well, I will very, very briefly introduce myself and say that I have written 60 novels in my time. I was going to write a memoir about writing at one stage, and I was going to call it 10 million words, which is how many words I think I have written since the age of 22, when I was published for the very first time. I'm unusual in that I write a great many different genres. I've written crime, I've written horror, I write poetry, I've written theatre, I've written historical novels. The only type of writing I have never done is romance.
I tend to approach writing in the same way. I mostly stick to fantasy, especially now that I'm trying to like market myself more and whatnot. But like when I was 16, I wrote a like 14 actually. I wrote a sci-fi novel about a cyborg android girl who's capable of destroying the world. I wrote a paranormal book about a sister and her dead brother and how she's like trying to get over his suicide and he's like become a demon because he killed himself and he's trying to like protect her from the supernatural world and it doesn't go good for either of them. I wrote a novella about two journalists at the same company who are falling in love as a stalker who turns out to be their boss is closing in on them. I've wrote a lot of poetry. In fact, I actually have a published poetry book under my dead name that my mom kind of pushed me to publish when I was like 15 or 16. So kind of gone out there and wrote in a bunch of genres and whatnot. I wrote a historical fiction short story, and that was mostly because I wrote it for NYC Midnight, which is a short story competition that happens every year. Um, and I mean, I've wrote a couple of like contemporary, like romantic pieces. I wouldn't say I've wrote romance before. I also haven't wrote like explicitly horror before. I've wrote things with like horrific themes. But horror is another one I want to try and get into a little bit too. So, um, but yeah, kind of like him, I've gone all over the map.
Because, as my wife said to me quite recently, how can you write about something you have never experienced? So that's the only area that I haven't actually ever done it. But I have written a great many different things, and have been going for a very long time. And for this talk, however, I'm going to focus just on one book because I think that's the easiest way to try and get you into my head and to talk about the sort of the art and the craft, sort of the work of writing a book. And that is this book here, which I know again, if any of you read, this is a book called Close to Death, as you can see, and it is the sixth book or the fifth book in a series about a detective called Daniel Hawthorne. And I want to talk about how this book came about and how it was written and everything else. But before I start even with that, I want to start asking some basic questions. The first one is, why write? Why do any of us, a number of hands go up in this room, why do people write? Why do they commit themselves to the sort of the endurance of spending half their life, in my case, 40 plus years now, sitting in a room by myself in silence with no company apart from myself, a bottle of whiskey, and a dog? The whiskey is
Some thoughts probably at the end of this. Um, just because of making enough for myself there. I'm probably gonna have some thoughts about writing and whatnot and like my own little tangent at the end of this video. But I'll let him finish.
for the dog. And I asked myself, what is it that drove me to do this and to be this? Why should anybody bother to write? And also, what makes a successful writer? For example, tomorrow you have a Booker Prize writer coming to this festival to talk about his work. What is the difference between him and me? What is the difference between writing a work of art, which his book undoubtedly is, and a work of popular fiction, which is what I try to write? Should we be driven by the desire to write for money? Is that the reason why we write stories? And all I can say to you is this: I knew when I was 10 years old that I was going to be a writer. There was nothing else for me. There was no plan B. I knew without any doubt in the world. My inspiration, incidentally, was reading Tintin, the books by Hergé, The Adventures of Tintin. And because Tintin is himself a writer, people think he's a detective or an explorer, an adventurer. He is, in fact, a journalist and writes, although in all the books he's only ever seen writing once, Tintin in Russia. He writes briefly, but that is the only time he's ever seen to write. But I read those books and thought, wow, that sounds like a good life. But at the same time, the desire to tell stories, to entertain people, to keep people amused and distracted from all the sort of the horrors of the world around them, that to me was the impetus. And I've always grown up a little bit like an arsonist. An arsonist is happy if he can strike one match and look at the flame. If he sets fire to the lectern, that's even better. Set fire to this entire tent and he begins to enjoy himself. Set fire to the whole of Malta or the entire world. And that is his heart's desire. And that is how it's been for me. The money, fame, celebrity, success, book sales, all that stuff doesn't matter. I just want to keep people amused, and the more people, the better. So that is why I've always written and why I still write to this day. Where do books begin? That's the next question I want to ask you. Where do we start as a writer to do it? And for me, of course, the answer is simple. If I was in a room with just 10 of you, I would ask each and every one of you to come up with, actually, I would ask you anyway, what is the first and most important thing for a writer?
He's asking a lot of questions up front. Um, and so I think it'd be kind of fun to answer them just before he gets in too deep. Um, I'll let him keep talking.
Imagination is an important weapon, of course, an important tool. We have to have imagination, although there are writers who write histories, biographies, who write, science books. You don't necessarily need imagination so much as the ability to understand and to communicate. What is it that sets a fiction writer to write? What begins for a fiction writer the journey of writing a book, do you think? Sorry? Passion? Yeah, you're doing abstract. For me, it's one other thing. It's an idea. I heard it over there. The business of the writer like me, is to have ideas. And I have ideas, I would say, at a rate of about 10 a day, maybe 20, 50 a week, because
There's a common adage that I kind of ascribe to when it comes to like writing and ideas and whatnot. And that's that like ideas are cheap. It's the execution that counts. Which is certainly true because like he's saying he gets like 10, 20, 50 a week of just like different ideas of things he could write. And I'm very much the same way. And I see a lot online of like people being so scared to talk about their ideas and the things that they're writing because they're worried that people are going to steal it. But the thing is that nothing's really original. Everything's kind of already been done. It's just kind of how you personally execute it. And so just saying like, oh, I'm writing a book about a lost princess who has to save her kingdom, that's been done 100 times. I'm writing a war allegory. Well, Lord of the Rings did that 60, 70, however many years ago. Um, all these different things. And so, um, I'm curious to see where he takes this thought because it's clear he like comes up with a lot of ideas and whatnot. So I want to kind of see how he takes that because it's not just having an idea; it's having one that's like, I guess, good enough to expand on.
every single thing in the world, to me, has a story attached to it. The person standing there taking a photograph of me at this very moment. Why? Who? What's the photograph for? Where will it be used? Where did she come from this morning? This man in the front row. What is his secret? Why is he here? Is the lady on the right of him his wife, his sister, somebody, a complete stranger, somebody he wants to kill? I don't know. These are the things, the connections between all of us. While I've been in Malta, I've had two great ideas, serious ideas, for things that I might write. I'll share them with you. This morning I went to the Cathedral of St. John. What an amazing building. And I was walking around it and I was then told the story.
Fun fact, St. John is no, it's St. Paul. St. Paul is like the guy from Malta, although St. John and St. Peter are also pretty big.
Of the stolen Caravaggio. And because I write television as well as film, and which is one of the wonderful things incidentally, my wife Jill Green, who is my producer, who makes my TV programs, was standing next to me, and we both had the same idea at the same moment. And as we go out, we're talking about, is there a TV series about the theft of this painting? Or if not the theft of this painting, how about a TV series about the theft of a work of art, a great work of art? Television drama and crime has many, many murders and many different sorts of crime. Has there been one about the theft of a piece of art? And should it be the Caravaggio, or should we make up a piece of art, or do it the Mona Lisa, or whatever? And you begin to think about all the different things that would entail. What sort of thief would steal it? Do they steal it for money, or do they steal it to hold it to ransom? That's an interesting idea. If you don't, actually, that's what happened with the Caravaggio, of course. If you don't pay us a certain amount of money, we will torch this piece of work. And who is a detective who is going to investigate this? What sort of police
So I don't think, at least in the States, that there's a show about art thieves, for example, but there have been like art theft like arcs or episodes in crime shows. I feel like Criminal Mind. No, I know some crime show I watched when I was probably a little too young to be watching them had an episode about like art forgery or art theft or something along those lines, though. So it's definitely like come up before.
Policeman or policewoman has that sort of role in life. So that to me already is the beginning of a story. I mean, there was a second story which I've had since I've been on Malta, which is rather odd. But since I've been here, for reasons I'm not sure quite why, every single taxi I have got into has led to an argument. I have had the most aggressive, hostile, angry, and dangerous taxi drivers I have ever encountered anywhere in the world on Malta. What is it with these guys? What are they having with
So two things. It's really funny to me that up until now the captions have been spelling Malta, Malta. And also one thing that I found um while doing all this research over the last few months, that Maltese people themselves have said is that how like passionate they are and like down to have like tense discussions they are. So this doesn't surprise me.
their breakfast tea that puts them in such a foul mood when they, or is it something I've said, something I've done? So as I had the third or fourth round trying actually to get into this very compound where we are now, a sort of story began to pop into my head. Supposing we have a tourist who is visiting Malta with his family and who goes by himself in a taxi and has an altercation on the road with a taxi driver, as we did this morning trying to get back to the hotel, and they step out of a taxi somewhere where there isn't too much buildings or too much, and they have a row, and in the course of this row, one of them kills the other. And I thought, what if the tourist, as I was feeling right then, kills the taxi driver? And then then what happens next? What then happens? Supposing this tourist decides that the only thing he can do is to stay in Malta for 4 days. In 4 days' time, he has a flight out of the country. And he decides the best thing to do is to stick with the flight out of Malta, because if he tries to get in earlier and runs to the airport straight away, the police might find him. So he decides he will spend the next 4 days in the tourist group doing tourism in Malta with this secret in his head he's just murdered a taxi driver. And then the other main character will be a Maltese police officer who is closing in on what happened and getting more and more clues. And so what you've got suddenly is an interesting book. I'm not sure anybody has written a murder mystery that takes place over 4 days with a clock ticking until the flight. And the big question of the book, the tension of the book, is will this tourist be able to get on the plane before the detective stops him and arrests him? And do we
On God. I hope that somebody in that crowd heard that idea and decided to go home and write it because I would love to read that book. There's not a whole lot of books set on Malta, and most of them are like historical. There's definitely not a whole lot of modern ones.
want him to get away with it? Do we feel that he deserves to get away? So there is a sort of, I'm not saying I'm going to write this idea instead. I'm merely saying that this is how I live my life, that every single incident that happens suggests a story to me. And I'll go further than that and say that what I get when I'm walking around the world is a sort of a domino effect. What I just told you there is a first domino. Two people, a tourist and a taxi driver, have an argument and one kills the other. Plonk. Now, this first domino, you may have seen this on television where you have not one, but 1,000 dominoes, and they're all in a long, long line. Have you seen this done on some children's TV shows? One knocks the other, knocks the other, knocks the other, and then they spread out and they go up all the... I mean, the camera goes up in the air, and it shows a giant picture formed by all these falling dominoes. That, to me, is what it is to write a novel.
I, for a time, watching like domino videos, especially like the super artsy ones or the really intricate ones, was I don't think it was a special interest, but it was definitely like a stim I fixated on because it was just so fascinating to get to watch all the dominoes fall and to make something and to like I stopped watching ultimately because I would get sad at like all the hours of work that it took to make this and then, watch it all get destroyed essentially. But for a time I was really obsessed with watching like domino fall videos, I guess.
Novel is the picture formed by all these falling dominoes. And that is what I do every single day. And sometimes an idea will have only one or two dominoes and it won't take me anywhere. I'm not sure that taxi driver story I've told you has got enough dominoes in it really for a whole novel. But it might do. If not, if it's only got a few dominoes, it's a short story. So that is how I begin my ideas. But now I want to move on from that to the reality of creating this book and how I went about it. Just so I know instantly, has anybody in this room read Close to Death? So a few hands going up. I will not therefore reveal who did it in this talk. I will try and avoid that particular thing. This novel came about because I'm in a different sphere now, obviously. As a writer who's been around for a long time, I tend to be able to jump in and get published fairly easily. My publishers are always asking me for new books. Do I have some water here? Let me just grab this. And about 8 or 9 years ago, my new publishers, Penguin Random House, asked me to write not one, but a series of detective novels. Now, I have to tell you that in the world of publishing and writing, the series is something of the sort of the golden fleece. It's what everybody is searching for, the lost ark, if you like. Because if you can create a Rebus, a Morse, a Sherlock Holmes, a James Bond, a character who can go on for 1, 2, 3, for many, many books, you are doing something which is what all publishers love. You are creating something which the audience recognizes, and therefore they will always, when Ian Rankin produces a new Rebus novel, people will buy it because they love that character and want to know what's going to happen to him next. There are now, I think,
I had this with the Maximum Ride books. I had this for a second with The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, and then I read I think it's The Girl in the Spider's Web. It's the first one that came out after Stieg Larsson died. Um, and I was suddenly like, I just want to leave it at the first 3 books that came out. I had this with the Warrior Cat series too, actually, just like seeing the world constantly expand. And then they did that really, really, really weird arc with Cat Hell. That's about where I dropped it too. But yeah, just like having a series with a character that stands out and can go on like all these different adventures and just like having a story that could, in theory, never end.
26 or more Rebus novels. So with each one, you want to find out what happens as a result of what happened in the last book. And that's what Ian does with his books. He keeps developing the character. Also, from the point of view of a writer, if you have one character, I've created 14 Alex Rider novels, for example. The more you write a character, the more you get to know him, the more you understand him, the more there is to discover in that character. I see you nodding, Simon, in the front row there. Simon's written 4 books about the same character, and therefore also, that's not Simon, is it? It's Mark. Am I right? Mark. I've met so many new people today, all named after apostles of one sort or another.
They are so Malta is 98% Roman Catholic. Although I think I saw a statistic that is like 98% of them are registered Roman Catholic and only like half of them actually practice. But yeah, like there are people who are wanting to go back to more like traditional names and whatnot. There's definitely a lot of like biblical names, people named after biblical figures, people named after saints in that country for that reason. So I'm not surprised.
4 books have one character. With each book, you get to know more about the character and therefore have more to write. So I was asked, would I do a new detective series? And so I don't need to think, what's the idea going to be? Because the idea has already been given to me. But this time I have to think, what do you think? Where would you start if you were asked to write a series, a long-running murder mystery series that was going to have the same character in it throughout? Where would you begin? The backstory of who? Sorry, I don't know quite who you're talking about. Of which character? The detective. That's where you begin. Of course, if you're going to Sherlock Holmes is famous for many things, but of course everybody knows Sherlock Holmes first and foremost. Most people don't read murder mysteries because of the villain or the killer, although the genius of Arthur Conan Doyle was to create one of the greatest villains in literature. Although actually Moriarty, James Moriarty, only appears in 2 stories and almost nothing is known about him. He is famous because he's invisible and we know nothing about him. That was part of his genius. But for most people like me, the most important thing in a detective series is the detective, or so I thought. Penguin Random House wanted me to write maybe 5, 6, 7, or even, as it turns out, 12 books about this character about whom I know nothing. So I start asking myself questions about who this detective might be. Is he going to be fat or thin? Old or young? Gay or straight? Male or female? Black or white? Asian maybe? Could he be disabled, drunk, divorced, depressed, disgusting, diseased, deceased? How about an alien detective, or a robot detective, or even a detective who is an animal, a cat, let us say? And very quickly, having asked this question, I discovered something rather shocking. Everything has been done. They all exist. If you want a disabled detective, there's Ironside. Anyone remember that old TV series, Detective in a Wheelchair? If you want a detective who is diseased, Dennis Potter did a thing called The Singing Detective, with a detective with a horrible skin disease. A deceased detective, Randall and Hopkirk, deceased. Randall Hopkirk is a ghost who helps his partner. A vampire detective, believe it or not, there's a Korean TV series made in 2016. An alien detective, there was Alien Nation. Some of you may have seen a TV series that came out in 1989, produced by Fox. How about a robot detective? Well, there's one of those too, a superhero series from Japan in 1973, and a cat detective. How about a detective who's a cat? That's an original idea. No, it isn't. Tony the Cat Detective is one. The Cat Who Solved 3 Murders is another. Justin Cat Detective is yet another. The Magical Cats Mysteries. Anyone read that out of interest? I haven't either. Do you know there are 23 cat detectives listed on Google? And you realize, look, Writers can do what has already been done. Of course you can repeat what other people have done, but to me, innovation, doing new things, finding new grounds is to me the entire purpose of being a writer. Writing, I've always said, is an adventure. You want to go to places that no one has been before. So having thought about what the detective would be in this long-running detective series, I began to realize I was asking the wrong question, but that question had already been asked and already been answered. So instead I began to look at the whole structure and the way that detective novels work, searching for a way of doing things in a completely different fashion. So I began to think about the...
So when he says that, you want to be innovative and try and do things people haven't done before, I think you can still do that with ideas that have already been done. And I'm thinking about this because I've been playing it recently, but for example, Disco Elysium has a main character where you start the game and you passed out in your apartment after completely trashing it when you got drunk. And you have like this really tragic backstory involving your spouse and whatnot. Um, and that's how you start. And then you just kind of decide how you're going to go about this and kind of how you decide to solve the mystery of the game. Um, having a drunkard detective with a tragic backstory has been done plenty of times in plenty of books and plenty of shows and plenty of like movies and whatnot. But it's how this game takes that and interprets it is what makes it unique. And so it's not necessarily that you have to have a unique idea, just perhaps a more unique execution of it. It does sound like he's trying to find unique ideas off rip, which is kind of impossible to do in my opinion. It more so comes down to how it's executed.
Relationship of the three most important people in a detective novel. And they are, effectively, the author, let us say Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the detective, Sherlock Holmes, and the sidekick. The sidekick being Dr. Watson. Of course, the reason why Conan Doyle is a great grandfather of all modern detective fiction is that he was the person who first created that triangle which everybody else follows. With Agatha Christie, it's Poirot, who is the detective, Agatha Christie, who is the genius on the hillside. Don't forget that the most clever person in a detective novel is the writer, because the writer knows who the killer is even before the murder has been committed, because the writer knows everything. The writer is God. And then you've got next door to Poirot, you've got Hastings. And the sidekick is immensely useful because the sidekick knows nothing. The sidekick is effectively quite stupid. Hastings is not stupid next door. Hastings is very stupid, but Watson, who is the sidekick of Holmes, is actually quite an intelligent man, but nonetheless, he's on the same level as the reader. And I began to think about that relationship, the writer who knows everything, the detective who is his puppet, and the sidekick who knows nothing. And I thought, well, what if you swapped them round? Supposing the author, instead of being on the top of the hill, dropped down into the novel and became the narrator. Which, if you think about it, is exactly what Watson is. Who is writing the Sherlock Holmes stories? In every single book story, apart from one or two, it is Watson who is telling the story. He is the narrator, but he is actually Conan Doyle, but just with a different voice. So I thought, well, instead of me being the author, what happens if I put myself in the book and make myself the sidekick? So instead of being the cleverest person, I'm the stupidest person. Are you following me in all this? Because then suddenly the whole premise of the book has changed. Hawthorne is a private detective solving crimes. He hires, the story is he needs money. He's not earning enough money as a detective, so he goes to a writer to write about him, and the idea is they will split the profits of the book 50-50. And the writer that he goes to is me, not a fake me, but the real me. Me who is busy writing Foyle's War and doing other TV shows, and who hasn't got time for him, but is nonetheless arm-twisted into writing these stories, and so becomes the sidekick to him. We have a very difficult and uneasy relationship. Hawthorne is very rude to me. He is very cynical about my abilities. And the worst thing about it, he has some very, very unpolitically correct ideas, politically incorrect ideas, which I find very difficult to live with. But the worst thing is he calls me Tony. I hate being called Tony. My name is Anthony, if anyone wants to ask questions in a minute. But anyway, he calls me Tony, and we have a very fractious relationship. But here's the thing. If he doesn't solve the crime, I don't have a book. I live in these books in terror that he will fail, but I'll write 120,000 words, but won't have a final chapter. And the other thing about him is that I don't know what to describe. If I'm Conan Doyle, I'm the author on the hill, I know that it's important to mention this, the fingerprints on the windowsill or the ash in the ashtray. But because I don't know what on earth is going on, I just have to take potluck about what I describe in the book. So what you have here is, I hope, a completely original and different sort of whodunit. And that's, to me, what the whole craft of writing is about. It is finding new ways to do things that have been done many, many times before. Now, having come up with him, My next thought was, effectively, what sort of crimes would we be working on together? This wasn't really a big decision to make, because what sort of crimes are there in the world? I mean, there are cold cases, there are murders that happened 15, 20 years ago, which you can then try and solve. There are loads and loads of books of them. There are serial killer stories. Serial killers, incidentally, make very, very bad subjects in murder mystery. They're great in books like The Silence of the Lambs and other books like that, although Thomas Harris, I think, really did corner the market in serial killers. But serial killers as sort of suspects in a murder story, you cannot get to the end of a clever whodunit and say he did it because he was crazy and liked killing people. It won't work, I don't think. My sort of crime. So serial killers weren't of great interest to me. I did think at one stage the Hawthorne and I might solve wills. My wife and I, Jill Green and I, had worked for years and years on a TV series called Where There's a Will, which looked at simply people leaving money to other people and then dying, which of course is a perfect recipe for a murder mystery story. How did they die? Did they fall? Were they pushed? Sort of thing. But we got close to making it, but never did. But still, that idea, maybe a story all about wills. But the truth is that with Hawthorne, I knew at once that we could do any sort of crime we wanted, because we already had the core idea, which was that I was going to be the sidekick. And then we come to the other thing aside is, was this going to be the world of Agatha Christie, or the world of police sort of drama, serious police drama, maybe your sort of drama? Because that's a very big question for me. You know, Agatha Christie is a genius, but her stories are, shall we say, a touch on the unrealistic side. I mean, apart from the fact that they have butlers and actresses and bishops and writers and explorers and retired colonels, and they belong to a slightly strange world, they are, as it were, heightened writing. They're not the real world. I could have written more like Ian Rankin and put it into a sort of the true gritty crime stuff, but that's not me.
It's interesting that he calls like Agatha Christie's mysteries unrealistic. I haven't read a bunch of them, but I think it was Murder on the Orient Express, and then I read and then there were none. And it was certainly really interesting to see how it unfolded, but it never really came across as unrealistic to me. That said, when talking about like elevated circumstances and situations and kind of like quote unquote unbelievable setups and whatnot, it does make me think of like a fantasy crime, like detective story. I know I think Dresden Files did that. I'm not particularly interested in reading Dresden Files though, but it would be nice to see like other takes on that idea.
I actually made the conscious decision that I feel more comfortable away from reality, because the world I inhabit is the world of what is called intellectual crime, armchair crime, golden crime. The only description I never use is cozy crime, because to me, cozy crime, although it's bandied around a great deal, is quite a sort of to me, it's a contradiction in terms. There is no such thing as a cozy crime. You cannot be stabbed cozy.
Technically, it's called cozy mystery, but I see his point, but I'll let him go on.
Or shot cozily. You need to be, and I've always thought that even in the Hawthorne novels, death and murder is taken seriously because it is a serious business. So having decided on that, I started to write these books, and I wrote 5 books, or at least there are now 5 books. They are The Word is Murder, The Sentence is Death, A Line to Kill, The Twist of a Knife, and the one I'm talking about, or meant to be talking about now, Close to Death. Now, you may have noticed from those titles, incidentally, that my original idea, when I set out on this series, was that every book would have some word in it that was connected to writing, because these are sort of about writing. So I started with The Word is Murder, and then I went with The Sentence is Death. A Line to Kill is a bit weak, but sort of gets there. The Twist of a Knife, hopeless, and Close to Death fails too. And I realized very quickly that I'd actually run out after 3 books of titles that I could use. I did have an idea for one other book, which is going to be set in a mortuary somewhere, where a body is stolen, or rather a part of a body is stolen, the colon is torn out, and the title was going to be The Colon is Missing. But that one I haven't done. Anyway, that will be number 6 if I were to do it. So instead, I came upon this book, Close to Death. Now, when I wrote this book, and when I write any book, I think I've talked about needing an idea, but I've got the idea. The idea is that Hawthorne and I will solve a murder, or rather he'll solve a murder, and I'll be left bamboozled 10 steps behind him. But the first question I have to ask myself when I'm writing a murder mystery now is, what is the milieu? I don't know if you know this word, milieu. But it's an interesting word for me because it sort of suggests lots of things. It suggests not just where is the book taking place, Malta perhaps, or the south of France, or my next one in this series is going to be set in the south of France, actually in Nice. But the milieu is also about, what is the book going to be about? What am I writing?
I have no idea if I spelled that right because the captions aren't transcribing it right, but
About why am I even writing this book? And this is something I would say if there were only 10 or 15 of you in this room, to each and every one of you. I would say never underestimate how long the journey is when you're writing a book. It is probably 8 or 9 months of writing. Shall we say 2 or 3 or 4 months of thinking and structuring? I'll come to that in a minute. But then there's another whole year of it being published and then having to go out and sell the book and having to talk about the book and write articles about the book and be interviewed about the book if you are so lucky. And that, therefore, is going to be 2 years of your life. So when you begin writing a book, even if it's only an entertainment, a murder mystery, surely to goodness you've got to write about something. What is the milieu going to be? What is it you actually want to write about? Is there some way you can inject into this book how you see the world, how you feel about the world, something you want to say about politics, about the environment, about education, about reading itself? And this is something I've done in every single one of my books. For example, The Twist of a Knife is a book about theatre. It's about a particularly vicious theatre critic, a lady whose name for the moment escapes me, who gives a criticism of one of my plays. And I've wanted to write about this because it did happen. I wrote a play. I've actually written 2 plays, which I can tell you divided the critics in the United Kingdom, where these plays were performed in the West End, and the critics were split absolutely 50-50, what was called mixed reaction. Half of them hated my plays, and half of them loathed my plays. So by and large, it was an extremely unhappy experience for me, but that was something to write about. It gave me the pleasure of, A, having my revenge by creating this absolutely awful. Her name was Harriet Throsby, and I loved creating her. I loved murdering her, for that matter, as well. Not that I have any great animus against critics. Critics are only doing a job. But nonetheless, it was a pleasure to write it, and it allowed me to look at the world of what it's like to be a critic. One of the suspects in that book was her husband, who wanted to murder her because she was always criticizing him. That's the wrong tie to be wearing. Oh, this tea is not warm enough. You know, you're late. When are you going to get going? Oh, my goodness, your hair, you're not getting out. You know, that sort of wife. I'm happily not married to one, but that was the milieu. It was the reason to write the book. So when I started on Close to Death, number 5 in the series, and I'd already done one set on a small island, an island much smaller even than Malta. A Line to Kill is about a literary festival. I actually went to it on the island of Alderney, and when I went there, the moment I arrived at Alderney, I knew. In that moment, I said about ideas coming into your head. The first thing that happened to me when I went to visit Alderney was that somebody who was showing me around said, "You know, Anthony, there hasn't been a murder on this island for 1,000 years." And I thought, right, there's going to be one now. First thing, that's how ideas come, and indeed it is about a murder on the island of Alderney. It also allowed me to have a little bit of fun about literary festivals. I go to them all over the world. I do love going to them. I always enjoy them. But here were a bunch of really, really eclectic and odd writers. There's a pretentious poet, a very jolly cookery writer, a blind psychic who writes one of those books about, you know, the afterlife and all that sort of stuff. And that just gave me the pleasure of writing about something I know a great deal about. A little lesson to you. Again, I'm not going to, because there are so many published writers here, I'm not going to stand here. And indeed, I've forgotten to say the one thing I should have started with at the very beginning of this talk. So if you will just forget for a moment everything I've been saying for the last 25 minutes, just remember this. My favorite quotation by one of the greatest writers of all time, William Goldman, who wrote a book, Adventures in the Screen Trade. Nobody knows anything. So I'm talking about my experiences and my life and my work, but nobody knows anything. What do I really know at the end of the day? Take what I say with a pinch of salt or write it down and think about it. That's your choice. Anyway, when I came to write this book, Close to Death, I had just moved into a place called Richmond on the southwest side of London. Now, Richmond, for those of you who don't know it, forgive me. Richmond, for those of you who don't know it, is a sort of suburb. It's on the River Thames. It's very beautiful. There are a lot of very wealthy people who live there. And walking my dog around there, I noticed that there was a close. And you couldn't get into this close, a sort of a little fenced-off enclave of houses, because there was a gate across it. And I thought to myself, wow, that is a perfect milieu, a perfect environment for a murder story. In England, I don't know about Malta, I don't know if any of you live next door to a taxi driver, but we have a huge amount of stories and press activity about nightmare neighbors and difficulties between neighbors.
That's actually one thing I've not come across in my research is crime rates in Malta. I know so there's a lot of talk, especially like online, of like how corrupt Malta has become and whatnot. And I don't have any perspective on that because I haven't lived there and I don't know. Um, so I know from like a broader sense, like corruption seems to be like a big thing, and political problems and whatnot. But in terms of like person on person crime, I don't know. So that's I'd have to look that up.
And I should also say that when I was writing this story, the fact that I had moved to Richmond was a huge help to me, because I believe that it is always sensible to write about what you know. You can use Google Earth, you can use Wikipedia, you can talk to people who've been to places, you can look at films set in places, but it is so much easier and more entertaining for yourself to write about somewhere that you know, somewhere that you have been. I was now living in Richmond, and as I say, round the corner from where I lived, there was this enclave of houses behind a gate. And I used to walk past with my dog, another little point incidentally, which I would, if there were only 15 of you, would say, a dog is a great thing for a writer to have. My wife bought me my first dog when we'd just been married, I think, for 6 months, and she came into the room with a little pet Labrador, put it on my desk and said, "Here's a piece of exercise equipment you cannot ignore." And the point is absolutely true. I spend 10 hours a day behind a computer. I need to get out and have exercise. A dog is a wonderful thing. Walking with my dog, I passed this gate. And I want to know what's on the other side. What are these houses like? I used to go there and I would stand there for 10, 20, 30 minutes with this dog, waiting for the gate to open so I could slip in. It never did, but eventually I managed to find somebody who knew somebody who lived there. And if you want to know what this place looked like, go onto Google search and look up River Lane, Drum House, and the famous architect Terry Farrell, Farrell. And behind that gate were 6 of the most amazing houses I have ever seen. They were modernistic, sleek. They were glass and steel and cement. They had Japanese gardens. They were astonishingly beautiful, and I couldn't use them. Why? Anyone want to put a hand up and suggest? Yeah.
I'm going to guess because it's too familiar. Because if I looked it up to kind of see what he was talking about, and like this is kind of what you're dealing with. They're really rich houses. I'm curious to see what the actual answer is. But that would be my guess, is probably that they're too familiar.
No, they were. Every one of them was occupied. I didn't live in them. I don't want to tell people where I live, so I wouldn't put myself into a book that way anyway. I will tell you the answer. A detective story with a whole group of different people. To have one of these houses, you needed to have £5 million or more in your pocket. So everybody who lived there would be elevated, would be rich, would be more or less the same. They might be a rich architect, a rich actress, a rich whatever, lawyer, barrister, but they would all be of a certain class and type. And ethnicity, dare I say, still in the United Kingdom, not necessarily, but possibly. And that was, to me, they were going to just be the houses were too smart. But then, fortunately, I met somebody who said, go across the road, and there, across the road, was another road called Ferry Road, and I went in there, and this was the same. It wasn't a gated community. You can just walk in and walk out. But of course, as a writer, I can immediately magic up the gates and make it a gated community. And this had houses that had different sizes, different things, and I could have different people living in it. And so I am doing a book, as I said, about...
This is interesting to me because there's a fair amount of like crime and drama books set in the US that are like in the suburbs, where all the houses look the same, all the people kind of look the same, blah blah blah. And some of those books will like have have an outsider like sort of character as a stand-in to kind of like immerse you in this world, and you're learning things at the same time as like they are, and dealing with the weirdness at the same time as they are. So some books will do that, but sometimes, rich people just kind of kill each other for funsies. So
Nightmare neighbors. Now, I go on Wikipedia or Google or somewhere, and I discover that these are the biggest complaints you get in the United Kingdom about neighbors. Noise, parking, property, who owns what, who owns how much, what the boundaries are, overgrowing trees, children making too much noise. Now, any one of these can lead to murder. That's a great thing about living in the United Kingdom. Neighbors do really get under your skin if you let them. And so my immediate thought was this. I'm going to include every single one of these problems in my book, because these are, according to all the records, the main causes of upset: parking, property boundaries, overgrowing trees, noise, and children. So all of those are going to be up there, and somebody is going to kill a neighbor who is guilty of all of those crimes. But whatever the solution to the book is, it's not going to be any of those that actually matter. It'll be something else that you can't see. That's how I structure these books, because everybody's expecting it because of this, because of this, because of this, because of that. And nobody will notice over here, actually, it's because of something I've told you, which you haven't seen. So now all I had to do was to people the book, because the next biggest challenge for me, and I'm sort of jumping forwards, because I'm looking at my watch, and I want to stop in about 8 minutes' time to allow for questions from you. And when I get to the end of this, possibly not, but I'll try and get as far as I can. Book and writing is about character. All stories depend upon character. People ask what comes first, the story or the character. For me, they come at more or less the same time. The characters have to carry the story. And you have to have characters, particularly in my sort of novel, we're talking about a crime novel here, that are both believable, people you would believe and accept are living in Richmond, but they can't be boring. They've got to be interesting. You've got to be hooked by these people. And so these are the people that I decided on having in this close. It took me, I think, longer to come up with these characters than anything else in the book. But if I listen them very quickly for you, again, I'm going to give you an idea of how I think. I started with the villain. His name is Giles Kenworthy. Now, let me just give you a quick word about names. A name is the first thing you learn about somebody. You know, when you have a grandchild, I've just had a grandchild myself, and they told me the name was Cosima. Well, yeah, I love that name, I suppose. But that's the first thing I know about this little girl. Anyone I meet in this room, the first thing I will learn about you is your name. Names are so important. My favorite author, Charles Dickens.
I think this depends, because a lot of books and the way I approach kind of like introducing characters is you tend to see them before you like hear them speak or know their name, and sometimes like learning their name is, excuse me, learning their name is like one of the last things that you learn about them in a scene. Like, using an example from my books, from example, A Trouble More Lasting Pain has a chapter where Simone, one of the main characters, goes back to Nadia, their girlfriend's apartment, and after she's gone missing, and finds that it has been closed off by the faculty, and that it's been charmed so that if they try and break into it, the faculty will be alarmed and they could get in trouble. And somebody else on Nadia's floor happens upon them in this time, and they happen to have illusion magic at their disposal, so they can kind of help Simone out. And so they talk to Simone throughout this whole scene. They're pretty cold and standoffish. They're like, "Yeah, your girlfriend kind of sucks. I heard she's gone missing. I heard her and her best friend were like at each other's throats all the time." And so they impart, excuse me, a lot of like outside information about a character we've already seen and already know. Um, and then like one of the last things they say at the end of the scene is, "My name is Shay, not that you cared." Um, and so it's one of the last things in that scene that we kind of learn about them, and it is used to kind of hammer home their personality and to kind of like hammer home Simone's kind of short-sightedness in this moment, because they're so preoccupied with finding the answer to where their girlfriend went that they don't even like ask for somebody's name. And so they're dealing with somebody who's willing to go far enough to like help them out in this minor way, but is clearly not thrilled about it. And at the end, just kind of has to get in that last little barb. And so I don't always like, names are the easiest way for us to identify a character, um, and to like know who's being talked about. But I don't know that the name is the most important thing. And it's certainly not the first thing that you learn at all times. A lot of stories will like and open with, so and so was doing so and so. But it doesn't always happen that way.
Came up with the most wonderful names. If you want a teacher who you don't want to come across if you are a student, call him Wackford Squeers. You sort of know that is not a teacher you ought to be taught by. Dickens took it too far, but even his heroes, David Copperfield, Nicholas Nickleby, they have names that make you think, oh, I like this guy, I want to meet him. Uriah Heep? No thanks. So names are quite interesting, exciting. Giles Kenworthy. It's not a ridiculous name, but somehow there's something about that just to me, the Worthy, the Kenworthy, I don't know. When I then add that he's a hedge fund manager, well, I hate him already. I understand that he's an old Etonian. Great, that's great. He has two very, very noisy kids. One of the things I need. He also has 4 cars. He's got a Mercedes, a Mini Coupe, a Pontiac Le Mans Cabriolet, and a Porsche Boxer with his own initials.
Did he just call it a coupe? It's a coupe. It's a mini coupe.
This is a number plate, COK 999, Cock 999, as it is. And
That's funny.
even in this little tiny cartoonish thing, I've created a man who does deserve to die. And then I sort of start thinking about his people around him, because that's a great thing. A murder mystery is a bullseye. The bullseye is the murder. Somebody is killed by somebody else for a reason. And all I'm doing now is I'm building around that bullseye all the different people who might have killed him, who might be associated with him. In this book, they're all his neighbors. One is his wife, Linda with a Y. She met him on a long-distance flight. She's an air hostess. But then again, my job is not to caricature that sort of person, to say just because she began life as a job as a British Airways air stewardess, or whatever it is you went to call them now, air attendant, she turns out to be very bright, very intelligent, very charming, and very, very attractive. So I don't go for caricature. I have to avoid that. That's sort of a crime in a book in itself. Next door to them, the neighbors to the right, Roderick Brown. He's a dentist. Perfectly reasonable for a dentist to be there, but that's not interesting enough, is it? A man is a dentist, end of story. So I make him a celebrity dentist. And he's very, very proud of the fact that for a short while, the actor Ewan McGregor was one of his clients. And suddenly you begin to see this man who is so pleased that he knows the inside of Ewan McGregor's mouth.
This kind of reminds me of this TV show that I watched for a little bit called, I think it's called Royal Pains. And it's this doctor who performs procedures on all these like top end, like super rich celebrity people. But a lot of the times, the circumstances that he's in requires him to solve their problems in unusual ways. So, like, there's an episode where he has a client who needs a blood transfusion, but he doesn't know their blood type, and so he has to do some weird test. And I know he like puts blood on like glass or metal or something, and he applies like something super basic to it. and one blood type reacts in a way that no others will, and that's how he's able to tell like what blood type it is. I don't know. Um, so shit like that. I'm just thinking of that because he's a doctor figure who works on celebrities. Um,
Actually based, incidentally, on my own dentist, who is a celebrity dentist. That's not his name, but it's always much easier to draw characters from the people you know and people you read about than to create them from scratch. His wife, Felicity Brown, is suffering from ME, which is myalgic encephalomyelitis, which is actually a horrible illness. It wears you out, it exhausts you. So into this world of fantasy and sort of silliness, I've now got something I can write about with a bit of sympathy and sadness. This woman has only got one thing in her life, which is a view out of her window, which goes down to the River Thames over a garden, and Giles Kenworthy wants to build a swimming pool in front of her house, destroying her view. So that's a reason for Roderick Brown to kill him. These people you see all have reasons to kill him as well as lives of their own. Linda Kenworthy, for example, is having an affair with a tennis coach, so that's her reason to want to kill him. Next door, May Winslow and Phyllis Moore, two retired nuns who run a bookshop in Richmond itself. That's a little bit outre, a little bit fantastical, but they are based on people I know. When I was a boy at my house when I was 8 years old, we had a cook and a maid, and their names were Phyllis and May. That's where the two characters come from. And they run a little bookshop called the Tea Cozy in Richmond, which only publishes.
so he's definitely somebody who takes a lot of inspiration from his real life to make people. And that's certainly a way that you can do things. I'm mostly not. I've definitely written characters that have facets of my personality or personalities of people in my life, but for the most part, I just kind of make them. So like, um, again, pulling from a sharp and more lasting pain, there's a guy named Professor Darcy, who's he's a kind-hearted like glyph professor. His whole thing is like glyph design and like the study of it and whatnot. And he's in the very first chapter with Simone going over their thesis. And everybody kind of wants to fuck him except for Simone. Simone's like, I can get the aesthetic attraction, but I just I like his brain. Um, and that's not in a way, if I think really hard about it, I can think of a teacher from my high school that kind of fits parts of his character, but I wasn't directly thinking of him because I never had that teacher in high school. When I was writing Professor Darcy, I just wanted a character that fit this role, and I figured they should have these sort of traits, and then I wrote it. And so, there's definitely different approaches to writing characters, and it's kind of interesting to see his, because I definitely don't get as like, um, oh, what's the word? I don't get as like referential to my real life as he does.
Books that aren't violent, which allows me, the milieu, to write about what I love writing about, which is cozy crime. That's what they're selling, is they only sell cozy crime in Tea Cozy. They wouldn't stop me, and I can have a little laugh at the types of books they write, particularly when it turns out at the end that they both brutally murdered their husbands. So that's a sort of the little joke built in there, and a little spoiler for you if you ever read the book. However, then there's Andrew Pennington, a black barrister. He's living in this close too, and that allows me, I have a very good friend who is one of the most successful black barristers in the country. He told me a terrible story about how his entire career had been a fight against racism and against, people wanting him to fail because of his colour or not giving him the jobs he wanted. I could not believe that in the 21st century, that and in the Great Britain, which prides itself on its sort of multiculturalism, that sort of attitude still existed. So it was wonderful to put him into the book and to write in his words the words.
Modern white person WL when we realized that uh racism didn't go away. Um and that's definitely something I kind of had to confront when I was in school too. Because it was like half white kids, half Hispanic kids, and then like two, maybe three black people in my school, and like a small handful of mostly Filipinos, but yeah, I think it was mostly Filipinos. Um, as like the other, and a couple native kids because there's some tribes where I live. Um, and so like a couple of native kids, one of which is my now spouse. Um, but just kind of hearing from my classmates in this pretty it's become a little more mixed over the last few years for obvious reasons, but hearing these kids in this relatively liberal area, still talking about how um they were experiencing racism in all these different forms and kind of like having to grapple with my disbelief of it and then, having to educate myself more. And so it's just, it's not funny, but it's interesting to see like I think he said he's 60, a 6-year-old man like doing the same thing now.
That is, of my friend Harry, what this man was thinking, to be able to highlight something that matters. This is a whodunit. It's disposable. You're going to read it and forget it. But maybe, in the course of writing it, I can put something in that is worthwhile and worth having and worth remembering. And that was, I suppose, one of the main things. Then there's Adam Strauss, who is a chess grandmaster fallen on hard times. Loved writing about him. I'd loved imagining what it must be like to be a chess grandmaster. And he's a chess grandmaster who's fallen on rather hard times. There was a time when he was famous with a TV show, a quiz show, called It's Your Move. And I remember when I thought that up, I immediately knew this sad man. Who, for God's sake, would watch a quiz show, a chess-based quiz show called It's Your Move? It's pathetic. And I love the sort of the fact that he's great, he's a grand master, that's his name. He's the greatest chess player in the country, and yet he has fallen to that sort of level. And he was fun to write. And one other character I'll go on about, Tom Beresford, an NHS doctor who's having a breakdown because of his of the amount of work he's got to do. Giles Kenworthy, his neighbour, parked a car across his drive, and he was unable to get to the surgery in time to stop one of his patients, an elderly gentleman, from having a fatal heart attack. And he blames Giles Kenworthy for that, and that's his motive for doing the crime. So that's a good story from the point of view of the crime, but it's also, for me, as I create that character, something else I want to write about, because, of course, in Great Britain, we all talk about the NHS endlessly. We want to support it. We know very well that the doctors, particularly the junior doctors, are under enormous stress, and so therefore that's another added plus to put into the book. Now, I've been talking fast and I'm about to stop, and I know if I ever do this talk again, but I need 2 hours to do it in, not 1 hour to do it in, but I hope that in this sort of rather rushed and brief way, I've managed to give you an idea of the workings of the writer's mind. That's all I can actually do here. I haven't talked about structure, how I spend 3 months or 4 months structuring every single book I write. Sometimes it takes me longer to structure a book than to write the book. But I'm not standing here either and saying to you, as writers, as fellow writers, as would-be writers, you should all structure your book, because some of the best writers I know don't. Ian Rankin has told me that when he writes a book, he just has an idea and begins to write and sees where it goes. I'd recommend a book to you by an author to you called Liz Nugent, who I'm very fond of. Liz Nugent has written 2 wonderful books called crime books. One is called Strange Sally Diamond. The other are Little Cruelties. She comes up with a sentence. A sentence falls into her head, and she starts writing, and again, she doesn't know where it's going to go. She tells me, but she still writes absolutely wonderful books. And
I've definitely evolved over the years because I used to be pretty similar. I'd have an idea and I would just kind of run with it. But um, especially in the last like 5 or so years, I've grown a greater and greater need to have outlines and to have a structure that I can follow along with in order to write something. So like with this book, for example, I wrote it 3 times technically, but I have this whole outline that I did. And so I did one, I sent it to my writing group, I got some feedback, and then I wrote another one with their feedback in mind. And then the third one's technically the same. I just added spots for interludes. So, but yeah, I used to be the kind of person who could just kind of get an idea and go with it, and I'm very much so not anymore.
Winslow, again, one of the greatest crime writers on the planet, who sadly gave up writing books in order to focus on fighting the last election and supporting the Democrats. I'm afraid that didn't go too well for him. But he also, I read a book of short stories of his called Broken. They are masterpieces of construction. I said to him, because I knew him, I said, how did you structure them? How did you do it? He said, I just started writing and I wrote them. So you don't have to structure, but I do. I think that when you're writing a book is a
It also depends too, because a lot of my short stories are, I get an idea and I go with it. Although that's kind of shifted to where I like having an outline or at least like some sort of structure to kind of go off of. It really depends on the short and how long it is, though.
foreign country. If I come to Malta and I don't have a map of Malta and I come here for the first time, how am I going to find my way to St. John's Cathedral? How am I going to decide to do St. John's Cathedral in the morning and then do a harbour tour in the afternoon? Because I need to know how near they are to each other. But having a map doesn't mean I have to start at St. John's and then go to the harbour. I can go anywhere. A map doesn't constrain you. A map opens up the landscape in which you're writing. That's why I like a structure. And I like to surprise myself sometimes. I think if you don't surprise yourself, how will you surprise your readers? And often I will go offbeat. I'll get to chapter 7 and take a completely different direction. The structure allows me to come back to where I'm meant to be, to realize I've got to find a way back to point number 8 in the structure to continue my story forward. So that's a few words on structure. I was going to talk about the opening and the cover. I don't have time. I could talk about the writing process. You don't need to know that. I'm looking at my watch and I'm saying 20 past 8. So I'm going to just say the 5 pieces of advice I get asked by young writers. And I'm going to finish on this note, and I'm going to open it up to questions from the audience, which, you know, we can stay here for longer than an hour if you wish, but if you don't, I'm at least not going to be accused of going over the limit that I was given. I'm often asked, what are the 5 pieces of advice that I would give young people, to children? And I always start by saying, and it's true for adults too, I think, read. If you don't read, how can you possibly write? I love reading. My influences, Charles Dickens, who I adore and have adored all my life, that mixture of humor and social statement and twists and turns and surprises and violence. There is nobody like him still, I think. And I love Dickens with a passion. I've read all his books 4 times, and every time I read the books, I learn something new about myself. And I think that's the greatest thing about great literature. It's not that the books change, but you do, and the books reflect that change. So now, when I last read it, I was shocked by some of the way he treats women, for example. That never occurred to me when I was in my 20s, but now I can see it, and of course it's true of his life as well. So that's the first thing, is read. The second piece of advice, write little and often. Don't sit and stare at a blank sheet of paper. If you sit and stare in a room at a blank sheet of paper, all you will do is drive yourself mad. Go out and do things. You need to do that. This is the advice I give to children. Go out, have adventures, do something illegal, don't get caught. Because that way, at least if you live life on the edge, which I have done, I've done bad things and wicked things, and I've done crazy things, they've all been grist to the writer's mill. And particularly when you get to be a successful writer, you don't know how many hours you are going to spend in that room by yourself. I often say that the only difference between a successful writer and an unsuccessful writer is that the room gets bigger. You know, that's the thing. I've got a slightly bigger room than I had when I started, but I'm still stuck in it by myself with the dog day in, day out, although I do love what I do. That's 3 pieces of advice. 4th is, people say to me, is it difficult doing this? Is it difficult doing that? Never use that word, is my advice. Because I think if it's difficult, if it's problematical, if you ask yourself a question of why a character is doing something and the answer is difficult, something has gone wrong. I think that writing is like flow and immersion and getting into the story and going where it takes you. Yes, with a structure, yes, with notes, yes, with planning and thinking and all the rest of it, but the actual writing itself should be easy and immersive and fun. And I love writing. I use fountain pens, by the way, not computers. Second draft computer, I love fountain pens. Why? I love being close to the paper. I love writing without Bill Gates or Elon Musk or anybody else between me and my work. I love the flow of ink. Writers are united all over the world. Our blood is blue, the color we use to write ink, and it connects me with the great writers, Dickens and Hardy and Austen, all these other great writers. What is it they wrote with? Ink. And so that, to me, is something that I always like to do in my work. And the last piece of advice, which I will leave you with before I open this up to questions from the floor. It is the most difficult thing in the world, but it's to believe in yourself. It is we, as writers, live endlessly in fear of being found out that we are no good, that all our work is actually rubbish. I've often described my life as being like that character in a Wile E. Coyote film, the Roadrunner films. I'm that character who is running along a bridge, and the bridge is burning behind me as I go, and the only problem I'll have is if I stop and look round. Then I'll see the bridge has gone, and I'll fall to my death in the chasm. Keep going forward, keep believing in yourself. Don't listen to whatever anybody says about your work, unless you are getting constructive and helpful criticism from an agent, from a friend, whatever. But self-belief is the toughest thing of all, I think, to acquire and to keep as a writer. And even now, even in this late day when I've sold the books that I've sold and the position that I have and I get invited to a festival like this, I can tell you, when I'm writing a book, it's a work of genius. It is the greatest book ever written since the Bible. When I write the end and I stop writing a book, it is a piece of rubbish. It
Is a bold statement to make in a Roman Catholic country.
garbage, it's awful, my editor's going to hate it, my publisher's going to hate it, my agent will lie about it and say it's great, but everybody else, it's hopeless. And then there's that slow climb to publication, and will it succeed, won't it succeed? And in a sense, at the end of it, it wasn't the greatest piece of work that was ever written, it wasn't the worst, it was something in between. But self-belief, God knows, it's been my fuel now for 35 years of writing, and it's all really that I have left. And on that rather rushed note, knowing next time what I have to do to get to the end of the speech without missing out chunks in the middle, I'm going to stop and ask you if there are any questions and answers from this audience. So, we don't need the mic. We don't need it. We're having it.
At what time do you know the major clue that will reveal the murder? Before you start writing? And what comes first, the clue or the character?
Very, very good question. Did everybody hear it? Because you had a microphone, so you could. They come at the same time. In the clues, I talked about the structure. I have a notebook. I don't do post-it notes on the wall. I have a book. And in the book, I write clues. underline it, and on that page, I write the clues I'm going to put in. And I believe that the clues should always be in plain sight. They should always, when you get to the end of an Agatha Christie book, you never ever feel cheated. You always feel that you could have guessed it. I sometimes watch television shows on British TV where there was no chance of guessing who did it. And I get so annoyed. There have to be clues people can see. Now, in the book I've just finished, one of the characters has been created with a missing eye and very bad facial injuries and an arm that won't move because he went through a red light. And that is the clue to how the murder was committed. I'm not going to say if he lives or dies, if he's a victim or the killer or just a suspect, but that in itself, the character I knew was going to be this person who had these injuries. Now, that's not his entire character, but that is what he has to be for the book to work. And that's often the case with me, that if I look at this one here, when I describe to you the different characters living in this close, in the book, this book Close to Death, I actually told you who the killer was amongst those characters, and I also described what it was that would lead him to be the obvious killer, or her, one or the other. But I'm not going to say, because I don't want to spoil the ending, but the nature of that character and the fact that she was the killer were sort of born at the same moment. And the book, actually, the entire book, rests on this strange quirk of character, which could be the doctor who who is drinking and driving, because, a drunken doctor is obviously in a good position to kill because she is surrounded by all the, the equipment you need. Or it could have been, I don't know who I mentioned in that book, but nonetheless, one of them. So they come together, and I'm always looking for new and interesting clues that haven't been done before. It's not good enough, I think, to have left something behind or to have made a mistake or to whatever. It is something that is, it's not like a torn piece of a letter or a fingerprint or anything. It's got to be something that is special and different. The two come at the same time. Yeah.
First of all, I just want to give you enormous praise for the Susan Ryland books, which I think are absolutely extraordinary. And in terms of innovating in the genre in which in the mystery and detective and thriller, they're absolutely extraordinary. I have two questions relating from Moonflower Murders. One of the very specific ones is a TV series on at the moment. In Moonflower Murders, the Bert Lahr issue comes up, which the Wizard of Oz, the Friendly Line,
oh, yes.
Cowardly Line. That issue of bringing in real-life personalities, real-life people, there's even a reference, Matthew Pritchard pops up in Magpie. Has that ever become an issue? Because Susan Ryland says to Alan Conway, oops, I'm not so sure about this mixture of real and fictional. Is that a real agenting/publishing stricture/warning about not to mix the two worlds?
I'll answer your first question before I come to the second question you have. I take it you all heard that. I am interested in exploring. I've said at the beginning of this talk, but I'm interested in doing things that have never been done before, new things that. The gentleman has a second question. I'll get it anyway without the mic. I'm fascinated by the break between reality and fiction. I'm always exploring, for example, why is it that if there is a dead body lying outside this tent when we leave tonight, we'll be shocked and horrified. If there is a murder in Malta, if there is if somebody is killed tonight in the streets of Valletta, we'll read about it in the papers tomorrow. We'll all be a little disgusted. If it's in a book, we smile and we enjoy it. Why is this? What is it between reality and fiction that this transition happens? So I've become quite interested in putting in, and so you're quite right, in Magpie Murders, I decided very, very early on that I would have Matthew Pritchard turn up to provide a commentary in one chapter. I had lunch with him exactly as I described. And I've taken that much, much further in the Hawthorne Horowitz books, because I am myself real and I'm in these books. And so you have a complete divide. And I would say that one of the biggest issues I had, or worries I had, was in a chapter in that book where I'm having a meeting, and this meeting really did take place, with Steven Spielberg and Peter Jackson, the two greatest film directors in the world, and me in a room. And in the book, what happens is Hawthorne knocks on the door, comes in, says a few words, and destroys my career with these two people. And when I wrote this, I was very, very worried.
Oh, okay. I guess that's it. I didn't realize that ended so soon. Okay. Well, I guess that's that video. So yeah. That was a video about Malta. I'm gonna turn the music back on at least. Oh god. Gonna bring it to like there. So yeah, that was an interesting video to kind of go over. Not particularly anything new that I learned there. I've been doing this for 20 years, but it was still kind of interesting to see just like one guy's process. There were some interesting takeaways that weren't explicitly said, but were at least like inferred by the examples that he used. So like in the beginning, when he's talking about like why you write, he's like, why would somebody choose to like sit in a room by themselves and write and blah blah blah. And I do think a lot of writing is very isolationist. You know, at the end of the day, it is you at a computer or at a typewriter or at your notebook kind of like writing out something. But I think, and maybe it's just more of a recent shift of the tide, so to speak, but writing as a whole is very community driven, I feel like, because, you know, I mean, obviously there's AuthorTube here. I've been in a lot of indie author circles on like Facebook and Instagram, and I'm in a lot of different Discords on Discord. Like I'm in the oh goodness gracious, what is it called? I forgot it right now. Swords and Sapphics. I'm in like the Swords and Sapphics Discord, and I'm becoming a lot more active there and whatnot. And so it's just a lot of different writers talking to each other, kind of like rubber ducking each other, you know, when we have an issue that we need to solve, or like discussing characters, or critiquing each other's works. And so maybe this is just like a sign of like generational differences, but just because like a lot of the physical writing is you doing it by yourself doesn't mean inherently that I think writing is an isolationist activity. And so that was just kind of like an interesting thing I was picking up on as Anthony was talking. It was Anthony, right? I forgot the title list. Anyway. Goodness gracious. And I already said a lot of my thoughts kind of as he was going through his little spiel. I am a little sad that the talk got cut off at the 55-minute mark. It wasn't done, but yeah, just having that back and forth with people. I do think it's interesting the way he's approached the Hawthorne books, where he's becoming a character and whatnot, and the author becoming a character isn't something explicitly new. I mean, even in the days of like fan fiction and whatnot, the author kind of became a character with like all the author's notes in the beginning of chapters and stuff. And so it's not like, and obviously it's a little bit different, but just in general, the author being a character isn't exactly a new thing, but it's definitely interesting in a mystery novel like that, where, like he says, you have the author who knows like how everything's going to pan out, you have the detective who's trying to solve things, and then you have like typically a sidekick to explain the story to the readers and kind of have a everyman stand-in, I guess. And so it's interesting. I would have to read his books to see how they're executed, because I guess in my mind I struggle a little to conceptualize how he would be able to execute that. But that was pretty interesting. I still don't think I spelled that word right, or maybe it's not the right word at all. Milieu. Blah blah blah. And you know, his 5 pieces of advice for young people are pretty are a given. You know, some people won't agree with this take, but you really do have to read books in order to write books, to kind of understand, you know, the conventions of the genre, whatever you're writing, like whatever structure you're trying to use and whatnot. So you really do have to read. Obviously, to be a writer, you have to write. And then, you know, going out and doing things and having conversations with people and going on adventures and using all that as sort of inspiration for whatever you're writing is important. Believe in yourself is given. The never say something in the story is difficult is an interesting one, because essentially he's like, never say that something in the book can't be done because it's difficult, like having that as the reason why it can't be done. So that was kind of an interesting conversation. So yeah, it wasn't like a mind-blowing talk by any means, but it was interesting and it was a lot of fun. I still really, really wish I could have been able to watch the state of Maltese fiction and kind of like where it's going and whatnot. But alas, I don't speak Maltese. It is something I want to work on. but I at this current moment can't watch it and understand it. And I was like, oh well, maybe I can get like translated captions so I can at least like follow along, even if I can't like understand them. I can understand the captions. The translator wouldn't work. So I think it's also because it thinks they're talking in Arabic. I don't think YouTube has a Maltese setting because Maltese is Malta's a very small country. Maltese is a very small and kind of dying language. So that's probably why. But still, a little sad. I really wish I could have been able to watch that, but alas. I am going to take a 5-minute break. And then I'm going to do some sprints, I think. Probably just like 1 or 2. I am pretty tired. Actually, I'm gonna take a break and then I'm gonna go over the distance between stars and salt because as we can see on the sidebar here, there are a lot of tabs and a lot of things that have been kind of going on. I did give a rundown on this on that live stream I did like 2 weeks ago that I ended up privating. But I do, obviously it's privated, you can't watch it now, so I do want to go over that. I do need some water though, and to just go to the bathroom super quick, so I will, where's the AFK? There it is. I will be right back, and then we will go over the distance between stars and salt. Also, really quickly, this song is a reason why I would struggle with playing Explorers of Sky, because it is from towards the end of the game, and it makes me cry, like, every time. Even now, like, hearing it, I'm just kind of tearing up about it, but anyway, I'll be back. return. So I'm just getting things situated in the background, and up, because I want to talk about this one. So this is The Distance Between Stars and Salt. It is a sapphic seafaring fantasy novel that I am working on that is about two women, Dara and Seren. Seren is a Celestine, aka a woman who descended from the stars, and she has been tasked with slaying a world devourer who comes every so often in a cycle and has to be like fended off. And so Seren is tasked with stopping this world devourer, and Adara refuses to be left behind, and so she goes with her and kind of documents their journey, and it's all narrated as the eulogy that Adara delivers at Seren's funeral at the end. So it's been a lot of fun to write. It's very sapphic, it's very tragic. I have an outline, 3 draft tabs, and then all of my research kind of divvied up into different things, as you could see. In fact, we were working in my Malta in Fiction tab, and I need to go back through and add the link to the video and the title of it later on, but I'm not going to do that right now. So I just kind of wanted to go over how this project is going, give an update of where I'm at, kind of show off some particular things that have developed that I'm quite proud of myself for. And so I just kind of wanted to go over that because a few months ago, I was doing a lot of streams where I was watching videos and reading articles and stuff and doing a bunch of research on the country of Malta. And the reason for that is it is the inspiration for the main setting of the book, quote unquote. It's kind of there's a few islands that Adara and Seren go to over the course of this book, but Ilzadina is where the book starts and where it ends. And so it's inspired by Malta because my mother's family is from there. So my nana was born in Floriana, which is right outside of Valletta, which is the capital of the Malta, the island. And then she immigrated to Canada, had my mother. My mother immigrated down here to the States and had me. So I'm first generation American, and I think, what would that make me? I think that make me like a quarter Maltese. So, regardless though, it's in my family. It's a culture and a kind of heritage that I've wanted to reconnect with for a really long time, and it's been hard until recently to find information about it online, and the only other resource I really have is my nana, who I've been able to talk to her more recently, but over the years, our relationship was basically non-existent because her and my mom are on very bad terms. Which is their business, of course, and I'm not gonna begrudge either of them for that, but, I'm just glad to be able to have her as a resource now. She's funny. She sends me pictures of Malta all the time and tells me different things about it and whatnot. And so it gives me a good jumping off point to do my own research and to look into my own things. So I guess I'll just kind of take this from the beginning, because I released A Sharper, More Lasting Pain on October 10th. Of last year, 2024, which coincidentally is also the day of my wedding anniversary. And pretty immediately, once that book was like officially released and out and able to be in people's hands, I think it's a common feeling that authors have, where there was just this sort of emptiness afterwards. Kind of just like you've spent so much time putting work into this thing, and then all of a sudden you don't anymore, and it's just like, okay, well, now what? And so I was kind of hit with that, even like a week before the book actually came out, but especially upon release, I kind of was hit with that immediately. And that same day, my spouse was like, I think you'd make a really cool post-apocalyptic fantasy book. And I was like, okay, and I was already spinning wheels about a novella of mine, Across This Hollow Distance, And so I was trying to work on that, and I was like, okay, I mean, I could think about it in the future, but I have other things that I'm trying to work on right now. And they were like, oh, no, consider it, because, you know, you could do blah, blah, blah. And they gave me an idea that in Inception was too sci-fi for my taste. But I was like, I could do something with this. And so then I started doing research into post-apocalyptic stuff. And so, you know, what are the staples of the post-apocalyptic genre? Kind of what does it require? What are some examples of it? And then from there, I kind of went into, okay, what are some examples of post-apocalyptic fantasy? And, you know, different types of apocalypses that could ravage the world and whatnot. And so I did a bunch of research on that. And so, already... Small traveling group... Oh, it was kind of like this one. Oh, yeah, I watched a video, and the guy who did the video, or it wasn't an article, it might have been an article, didn't explain this one very well, but this was the basic premise, kind of, that I had been handed by my spouse, as an initial idea, and I didn't quite want to go with that, but I figured I could use it in some way. And then, you know, more basic information about, so, basic information about post-apocalyptic, and then, I have been wanting to write a book that was, like, inspired by The Legend of Zelda Wind Waker and a couple other things, for a really long time. And so I figured I can marry the two with having some sort of apocalyptic event that floods the world and is then, you know, reduced to a series of islands and whatnot. And so from there, I kind of took the original idea that I had and married it with an older concept that I had. Where is it? Crafty and horror. Also for a second I was thinking of making it cosmic horror because I, you know, needed more things to add to this. And I ultimately decided against that, although there is some, like, themes of, you know, an uncaring greater cosmos, but not necessarily. So yeah, I started with post-apocalyptic. I wanted to make something Wind Waker inspired. I had an old world-building kind of concept that I had been developing, and it was in this world that was a series of islands, because it was, like, my first iteration on this. And there were 3 main religions that I had built for it, and so 2 were, like, super similar, but then the third one was interesting because it was a belief in a singular god that these people believed had died, and its corpse had it was the reason their planet existed. And so, like, the oceans were its blood, all the islands were like its skin and its bones and whatnot. And so, you know, they have this unwavering faith in this drowned god. And so I figured I could repurpose that. And so I the way that I explained it is, in the mythos of this world, it is believed that very long ago, before the world flooded, there were some gods, but in particular this, what would become the drowned god, and there was this great cosmic force who was, like, slowly devouring other worlds. And so in an effort to keep this world from being devoured as well, the drowned god ended their life, and from their body kind of created wards around this world, and at the same time made their own sort of cosmic force, as in the Celestine. And so the world flooded, as it does, and, you know, the more elevated places of the world, excuse me, became what are now the islands of the world. And the wards held for a while, and then all of a sudden they didn't anymore. And so then, you know, the Celestines start falling to Earth, the great world devourer is coming back, and every so often one of these Celestine has to, like, systematically go off and sacrifice themselves in order to maintain the wards around this world. And so I started thinking about that idea some more, and I started thinking about some characters and trying to find where I guess it would be story spitballing, huh? So this was kind of my initial structure for how I was like thinking out this. And so of the different types of post-apocalyptic, I was thinking alien invasion or cosmic horror or religious rapture or perhaps like some combination of all three. I started like thinking over it more. And pretty early on, I wanted to have it be a sapphic relationship, and B, a woman whose spouse is the next sacrifice for this world. And originally, I have this note of Homera ex Matica kind of complex here. Originally, I wanted to lean into that more, and by Homera Matica complex, the way I wanted originally to handle this was having a Madoka figure, somebody who loves the world so much that she will sacrifice herself to save it and to become this larger than life thing for a love of the world and for the people that she wants to protect, versus a Homura type who all she cares about is Madoka, and all she sees is Madoka, and she resets the world over and over and over and over and over again in a maddening attempt to try and change the outcome. And so they're two great opposing forces that are just constantly trying to supersede each other. And Purpose Not Rising is coming out, I think, this year, and I'm very excited to see how that concludes. But originally, I was like obsessed with this dynamic, and I already kind of I'm exploring parts of it in a different project of mine called Those Who Emerge from Ashes, which is a dark fantasy novel I've been working on for like 10 years now. It's very slow going, but it does have some facets of that relationship, but I wanted to explore it in a different way because I'm obsessed with Madoka Magica. And so I wanted to kind of lean into that complex of somebody who wants to save the world versus somebody who wants to save this person who's going to kill himself to save the world, kind of. And so another part was I had inspiration from Final Fantasy X, Madoka Magica, I Am Setsuna, and Wind Waker, of course. And so I was thinking about this sort of escort mission where the sacrifice knows from the get-go that she's the sacrifice, but her wife doesn't. And so they're going on this adventure across the world, and it's sort of like the tragic reveal at the end where she learns that her wife has to die and there's no time to save her or any of that. And so this was a scene this was a scene I had envisioned very, very early on. This one ended up not being in the draft. This one did. In fact, I actually just finished writing it a couple days ago. And I knew pretty early on how I wanted the book to open. And it actually didn't pan out quite like this for a while. Not until like a couple weeks ago. And then I started thinking of lines that I wanted to have included in it. And this one survived all the way up until draft 1. Yippee. And then I had to change it because I'll get there. So then I started going through kind of exploring, writing a summary for it as I'm like conceptualizing these ideas more. And it goes through a lot of iterations. And some of them are like tiny tweaks. And then I started thinking about titles. And then I started developing races. I'm not going to show like all of these here, but the main important one here is the Celestine, which are people from the stars, who they all have 3 fingers on each hand, they all have 3 eyes, and then I kind of took inspiration from this TikTok video I saw once about Aasimar, and how they don't just have to look like angels, they can have like features of any greater celestial being that they take parentage from, for example, unicorns. And so I decided I wanted to have a unicorn girl, and so that's Seren. She is an Oryxian Celeste. There's also harpies, there's a lot of dragons, there's different birds, and so then I was conceptualizing names for them, and so I was kind of looking up different name ideas, different meanings. I ended up settling on Adara and Seren. And so Seren, I went with more like star-themed names. I did a bunch of research on that. And then this one, I think I just kind of looked up Maltese names and like behind the name or whatnot. Or I think maybe I went with meanings on that one. And I think if I remember right, Adara means like one who clings too hard or something like that. Hold on, let me pull it up actually, and then I can tell you. Because I know it's not just Maltese, but so it's Italian, Albanian, Romanian, and Maltese. And for Albanian, Romanian, and Maltese, it's in parentheses or rare, so it's not used a whole lot. But in Italian, it means ivy, from the Latin hedera, perhaps related to the Latin root hendere, to grasp, to take, to cling on to. And so I had a lot of thoughts when I saw that, and I knew that I had to choose that as Adara's name, because, you know, of these themes that she has of like clinging so tightly onto her wife Seren. And so then I started thinking about story structure and whatnot, which is where the notes here kind of come in, because I was thinking mostly of how to like write it out, and so I was kind of thinking of using the save the cat method, which I mostly kind of stuck to, but I looked at a few different kind of ways, and some advice posts that I saw online, and kind of how they were doing it, and so the different like formulas for, you know, excuse me, you know, 25% of the book, it's 25% of the way into the book, blah blah blah, and then just some story questions for myself and whatnot. And so going back here, I started going after Save the Cat and going through kind of like the explanation there, and I don't think I had names for them quite yet. I started making their names as I was writing this out, and so I'm just reading this over super quickly. That was another thing too, is originally my concept was that Adara and Seren were going to be in a marriage that was starting to struggle, because Seren for months at a time had been like drastically pulling away from Adara, and then all of a sudden she has this like personality switch, and she's like, hey, let's go on an adventure together. And so I presented that to my writing group, and their main issue was that made Seren very unsympathetic, and she's still, I struggle with her because she's still kind of, she's not the most sympathetic character ever still. She definitely, some parts of the homodomatica dynamic that I mentioned before have stayed, where Adara is the one who loves the world so much and wants to protect it, and Seren only wants to protect Adara. And so parts of that have still kind of stayed. In fact, I'm trying to write a conversation right now where they're talking about that explicitly, where Adara, you know, is taking in the beauty of the world around her, and she's like, you know, I'm really glad that I went with you, and that, you know, we're saving the world, and, you know, we're doing something good for it. And Seren's like, I didn't want this. I didn't want this put upon me. I didn't want to have to be the savior. I just want to be with you and, you know, grow old together and die in the dirt, basically. And so they have a conflict about that, because, you know, that's a very unsavior-like thing to think. But I think it's a more normal thing to think than a savior who's like, oh yeah, I'm the savior, I'm going to save the world. In this draft, the current one that I'm on, she also doesn't know yet that she's going to have to die. So there's that. Because that was another thing where my writing group really didn't like her knowing from the get-go that she was going to die, and kind of leading Adara along on this thing. But we'll get there. So I started thinking about like their character flaws. And so, you know, then I started thinking, you know, based on like the formula that I had, you know, I wanted to be about 80,000 words long, which means I need about 2,500 words per scene, which means about 32 scenes. So then I started mapping them all out. So I started mapping them all out, and I started mapping them all out, and I kept mapping them all out, and then I need to go back through and re-answer these questions, because a lot of the answers have changed. And then I started talking about cover inspiration, and, you know, covers that I was taking inspo from, and I ended up sending these to a friend who's my cover designer, and she's been doing an amazing job. I'm really excited to get to share that with people later on. So, but by this point, I had a, excuse me, I had a sort of outline in mind. So I took it, and this is the first outline, and so I transported it here. Like I said, I sent it to my writing group. They gave me notes, and so then I turned around and wrote a second one. And I didn't send this one to the group because a lot of their notes when I sent them the outline, because it was a very unorthodox thing for me to do, was, you know, I mean, this sounds good on paper, I'll just have to see how it's executed, which is a fair response. So then I took their feedback, made a second outline, and the only thing I did different for the third outline is, as you can see, I started adding interludes. And so these are different stories about the, about the constellations of the world, because I made my own constellations for this too. So I have a map that I am having my friend / cover designer make. I have a star chart. I have a star chart that she's making, and then she's been working really hard on the cover design. I'm so excited about that too. So I have 8 main constellations that I was kind of futzing about with, because there's a lot of themes of like stars and or not like themes, but like imagery from the stars and imagery from the sea, and kind of like how they intersect and how they're different and blah blah blah. And so I wanted to have like the main story, which is quote unquote the salt, because they're going on a journey across the ocean and whatnot, versus like these interludes that are the stars, about these different constellations, kind of where they came from. And originally it was just going to be like a fairy tale-esque kind of feel of like explaining the story of all these stars. I'll get there though. So I had an outline, and then I took it and I have it laid out like this, where I separate them. Oh, and I have a glossary at the end. Where I separate them all into their own little like sections, and I start writing them out. And I called this Draft 0. It's a term I originally heard from a friend in one of the discords that I'm in, and she essentially, the way she explained it is, it's sort of like a half first draft, where she's laying out all the basic beats of a scene, but she's not like writing it start to finish. And so that was something I took notes on in like my structure notes and all that, is I essentially didn't want to get, you know, say 25,000 words in and then suddenly feel stuck and unable to finish it, and, you know, have like not even half of a novel done. And so I wanted to give myself the freedom to, you know, skip ahead and you know, skip things and leave myself a bunch of notes and whatnot. And essentially the way my mind works is if I consider something a first draft, I can't do that. I may have like placeholders and stuff, like there's plenty here, like I still have to figure out the Saint magic system and whatnot, but it's nothing when compared to like, pretend this exchange didn't happen, hey, I need some transition, question mark, you know, just kind of all over the place and not finishing things and just kind of sprinting through this book as fast as I can, because, you know, if it's not a first draft, it feels different to me. So that's kind of how I've been approaching writing this. And so I'm, as you can see, this draft 0 is 26,000 words in, and I've hit the halfway point. I wrote a scene that I've been really looking forward to getting to. If you paid attention while I was going through like the scene ideas that I had at the very start, it's not jellyfish anymore. It's a scene where they're on the boat and there's like glowing algae all around them. I call it the rated M version of the Tangled Lantern scene, if you've ever seen that. You know, the scene where Flynn and Rapunzel light a lantern and throw it up into the sky with everybody else, and it's really beautiful and whatnot. I call it the rated M version because they fucking this one. Excuse me. But so I finally got to that part, and I was very excited for it. So now I'm on the scene after that, and it's actually, like I mentioned earlier, the scene where they're having the conversation of Adara wanting to save the world versus Ren not wanting to be the savior at all. And so yeah, I've been writing the 0 draft, and then I've been taking the quote-unquote scenes and whatnot, finished or not, I just take them and I transport them over to draft 1, and I mostly left them alone. In fact, most of this is left alone, but that writing group that I mentioned, it was my turn to go up this month. Oh my gosh, February's still going on. It was my turn to go up this month, and so I needed to send something. I didn't really have anything, and so I just started going over the first couple of chapters of this book again. And so I wrote up as much as I could, and I sent it off to them, and they really liked it, which I'm really happy for. And so that, and these are comments that I made based on feedback that I got from the group, that those written, like, actual first draft parts, I moved here to draft 2. So that's why there's 3 draft tabs and an outline. Another interesting kind of change. So I mentioned that first this was Seren knowing she was going to die and going on this final adventure with her wife. And so one big change that I made as a result of all the feedback that I got was there is now, at this point, neither of them know that Seren is going to have to die. We know because I made it clear from the beginning that it's so, but they don't know yet, and so they're going to find out towards the end of the book, and it's going to be a very tragic thing. And so I thought that that was an important change to make because it's more plausible, and it's less suspicious, and it really kind of heightens the tragedy of the moment when they both find out. I'm just kind of rambling at this point now. Another big change is I mentioned earlier that originally they were having marital problems and Seren was kind of pulling away. And so one really big thing that came out of my writing group when I sent them the outline is they wanted more hammering home of like the stars and their involvement and blah blah blah. And so we were kind of trading ideas back and forth by the end of that meeting. And a couple of them had suggested, you know, like a sort of, not quite military, but they were like conscripted sort of service where, you know, like each of them in turn are supposed to watch the stars for the World Devourer. And I really liked that idea, and then somebody added, you know, oh, they could be sent away for a year and a day and live in a tower sort of thing. And so I took that and I kind of ran with it. And so the way this book opens now is Seren has been gone for a year and a day. It's the day she's coming home. And aside from having been gone for a year, their relationship had been good before, but now all of a sudden Adara has spent the last entire year without her wife. Hasn't been able to send her letters, hasn't been able to hear from her, hasn't been able to know she's okay, made it safely, is coming back safely even. And so she's been just kind of stuck in this depressive vat of the unknowable. And so then Seren comes home and she expects this to be a very exciting moment for her. And instead it's not, because Seren turns around and goes, I have to leave again, because I was the one who saw it. And so they kind of have a conversation for a couple chapters where it's like, Seren doesn't want her to go because she wants her to be protected, she wants her to stay here. Seren is a Celestine, she has like powers of the stars, and so she can at least protect herself. Adara doesn't have that. She's not a human, she's an elf, but still, she doesn't have the power that Seren has. And so, she just wants Adara to stay home. And Adara's whole thing is, I just spent the last year without you, basically rotting in bed, or like being forced out to like go do a job that's like the one thing that's keeping me from like offing myself, basically. And you want to turn around and leave me again? Absolutely not, I'm coming with you. And I felt that like that made that more compelling, because even in the first iteration, Adara had that agency where she is the one who like forces herself into the mission and invites herself along with on the journey, and that was a really agency heavy moment for her. But kind of like the switch of the circumstances even, I feel like helps, because at least in the last iteration, Seren was like, you know, oh, we could go on an adventure together, you know, see the world, and then have the twist at the end, whereas this, it's like, Adara is the one who enacts it, I guess. So, that's another change that I've been excited about. And then, so in that section where I was sharing lines and stuff, so this was one of the first lines that I thought of, and it was the first line of the book. When I was kind of like outlining this and thinking of how I wanted to write it. And the general gist of this book has stayed the same, but so there's this important line here, which is also the first line of the summary that I'm currently sticking with. There was and there was not, in the oldness of time, a star-born woman and her hapless wife who ventured on an arduous quest. And so the there was and there was not in the oldness of time. I've been getting conflicting information about this, but when I was looking up like different openings to fairy tales and myths and whatnot, so like in the US, in Britain and whatnot, we have Once Upon a Time. And I think Korea, a lot of fables open with In a Time When Tigers Used to Smoke. Some places have like Across 7 Valleys and Across 7 Rivers and yada yada yada. And so different places open their fables in different ways. And one place that I had seen online said that Arabic in general, and Malta as well, because Malta has a lot of Arabic influences, they have a lot of Italian influences, a lot of Semitic influences, but especially Arabic. In terms of their fables, they have there was and there was not in the oldest of time thing. And so, because this is taking so heavily from the island of Malta and from that culture and whatnot, I want to have as many homages as I can. And so, especially with this like storytelling kind of quality, I wanted this A to be one of the first lines and B to be a kind of through line. And so all the interludes originally also started with there was and there was not in the oldness of time, a seahorse, a ship that crashed or whatever. So it's like a consistent through line across all of these different stories. And so I knew that I needed to keep that. When I decided to, I then decided to kind of restructure this a little bit. And I ended up kind of combining these bits into one scene, although then I added a whole scene before this in the scene with Adara at her job at the apiary. In this draft, it's a bat sanctuary. I changed it to an apiary because beekeeping is pretty big in Malta. So then we get to draft 1, and first off, I added an interlude at the very, very beginning that is in third person, and it makes it very clear that this is at a funeral because it opens with Adara at the funeral about to speak. And I made that choice because if you've been reading along, you'll notice that this manuscript addresses a you. It's a first-person narrator, but like from the second paragraph on, like the very first line is, the first thing I remember the keepers telling me is just how beautiful you were. And so it's Adara talking directly to Servet, even though it's a eulogy at a funeral. And so I wanted to make it very clear from the get-go that this, a problem I see a lot with second-person point of views and people's contention with second-person is a lot of people feel like when they read a second-person perspective, the book is talking to them, telling them how they're feeling, how they're acting, how they're looking, etc. And this is something I've toyed with in another project of mine. I wrote a short story called You Are Not This Person Anymore, which is a story where you have died, you have come back to life, and the only situation that I have handed you is you were married to a man, you came back to life, he's very shocked at your reemergence, and at the end you find out maybe that he killed you. And you're struggling constantly across the short to grapple with the person you are versus the person that you used to be prior to your death. And in that case, the second person POV was a deliberate choice because I was trying to kind of smother the reader in their perspective of this situation. And I kept it very vague about descriptions and whatnot, especially about you, because I want it to be like anybody could read this short and be handed this set of circumstances. But it was very important to me that it was in second person because in this case, I am talking to the reader. I didn't want it to feel that way though with this project because Adara's not talking to you, the reader, she's talking to Seren, her wife, the you. And so I wanted to make that very clear, and I felt like to make that clear, I needed to have some interlude at the beginning that kind of establishes this is the framing of the book. And so I added that prelude, and the interludes that I mentioned kind of scattered throughout the book are going to take on a similar role where they'll dive back into the funeral as Adara's there and have essentially the point of the interludes is they're tradings of stories from other people. So most of them are going to be at the funeral with other people telling different stories about the stars, because you know Seren is of the stars and whatnot. But there's one in particular at the very end that is Seren telling a story, and especially about being Celestine. There's a story she tells. In fact, it's the first interlude. There's a story that she tells Adara about one of the constellations, but overall, most of the interludes are set at the funeral, and different people telling Adara stories back to her, because there's a lot of themes in the story about community building and the trading of stories and how we tell stories and whatnot, which is why I mentioned that I wanted a lot of the interludes to start with this mechanic here. So, like I said, previously the first line was, on the day of my birth, that it is said that a star fell from the heavens in the shape of a girl. That was the original first line. I kept most of that because I really like it, but in order to kind of bring the storytelling element front and center, I combined it with there was and there was not in the oldness of time a star-born woman and her hapless wife who ventured on an arduous quest. A, because that line is pretty wordy, and B, because it was a nice enmeshing of the two. So now, the first line, and I'm sure I'm going to stick to it this time, is there was and there was not, in the oldness of time, a star that fell from the heavens in the shape of a girl. And so, that's the first line of chapter 1. I don't know if I'll continue to use it like I had originally planned. I would like to, but we'll see. Other things that I've either added to draft 1 already or I'm going to be adding in draft 2 is kind of halfway through what I've written so far of draft 0. I was thinking about, I've been waffling a bit on whether or not to give them an animal. Originally, I decided not to because I figured it'd be too hard for them to take care of while they're on a tiny boat out to sea. And then I figured I needed to have one for character arc reasons, to give, because Adara's whole arc throughout the course of this book is the year that she spent without Seren kind of forced her to realize that she has been subsumed by this relationship with Seren, and it's not Seren's fault, and it's not Adara's fault either entirely, because she's kind of, it's like dating a celebrity. They become the most important thing in your life, and they become the thing that everybody else in your life cares about. They don't ask about you unless it's in relation to your celebrity partner. They don't ask about anything unless it's about that celebrity partner, really. And so, having spent so long in this relationship where it's Seren, she's kind of lost herself along the way. And so, along the course of this journey of, like, getting to reconnect with her wife and getting to explore this wider world with her, she is kind of coming to terms with the fact that she doesn't know who she is without Seren, and that scares her. And so her whole arc is rediscovering her purpose and what she wants to do as an individual and not just as Seren's wife, is the whole thing. And so I figured part of that could be giving her and Seren an animal companion that she has to take care of, where she kind of becomes the Seren figure to that creature, because Seren is the most important thing in her life and in everybody else's, to her's life, and to this animal companion, she's the most important thing in its life. And so I have decided, for multiple reasons, to give them a ferret that she originally finds in a well, with dragon wings, and it has a few other draconic features. It breathes fire, it has sharper nails, it has like a series of spines on its head and like going down the front of its chest. It doesn't have a name yet. We've only seen it once in this current draft, in draft 1 rather, because it doesn't show up at all in draft 0. But it's going to be coming up a lot and be crucial to Adara's character arc. And so that's pretty exciting. That's one thing that I'm adding with draft 1. One thing that I need to add in draft 2 that I was kind of brought to the attention of when people were reading this last week. So Malta has really big festivals or festas for their saints, for New Year's, for big holidays, for a bunch of stuff. They're very, very festa happy people. And so one thing that I just didn't think of, I guess, is Seren coming back from being away for a year would be like the second coming of Jesus to the island of Ilzadina. And so they should be having a festa for her. So I need to add a festa scene in draft 2, but I haven't added it in draft 1. There's a place I could conceivably add it in draft 1. I don't know if I'm going to have time to add it before I'm up next to my rating group. We shall see. But that's another thing that I'm needing to add. There's been a couple turns so far that have kind of surprised me with draft 1 versus draft 0, because draft 0 was very much building the scaffolding, and now I'm filling in all the walls, basically, with draft 1. But I plan mostly to keep things the same and just to kind of build on what I started in draft 0. We'll see if that pans out. I'm really happy with how it's going, though, in general, just how things have developed, how it's looking, how it's sounding, even. I'm really happy with the narrative voice. I'm really happy with the character arcs and the themes that I'm setting up. I'm really happy with, the trajectory of the story. I'm really happy with so much of this book and how things are coming along and how it's looking and how it's coming into being. And I'm very, very excited to continue to make progress on it. So, that has been my way too long ramble talking about the distance between stars and salt. Now, it is almost 8:30 my time. I'm going to be going to bed soon, because I have to work in the morning. So, I am going to be getting off in a few minutes, so unfortunately no sprints tonight. I would like to, maybe this weekend, maybe a couple days from now, do another stream, more sprint-oriented this time, get some words down, kind of talk about how things are continuing to develop in Draft 0, where I'm at, yada yada. I also want to go over my Notion next time, because I made some impressive decisions with Notion that's really helped me keep track of my word count. I'm not going to go over that tonight, because I just don't have the time. But that is something I would like to go over next time, is my Notion outline and what I'm doing with that. That said, I will show. Anyway, so that said, I would like to do another stream in a couple days, at least sometime this week, doing sprints, and getting more words down on this project. As for the future of this channel, I know I'm working on an essay on my newsletter, kind of talking about when to let things, like, let book ideas die. And that's because I mentioned previously I was working on a novella last year called Across This Hollow Distance, and I have indefinitely shelved that. I've gone back and forth for a while over it, and I've ultimately not scrapped it, but I've decided to shelve it, and I don't know if or when I'll work on it again. But I may, like I mentioned earlier, do a thing where I write out an essay and then I do a video companion for it. I'm not sure yet. But that's one idea kind of spinning around in my brain. But yeah, other than that, I would like to make this a more regular thing. I would at least like to do it once a week on Wednesdays if I can. And then more as time and my body and my energy allows. So that's kind of what I'm looking towards in 2025. So, I hope you have enjoyed your journey with me tonight. I hope you are having a good time wherever you are. I hope you're getting words down if you're a writer, or reading good books if you're a reader. I hope you are staying safe in the current regime that we find ourselves in. And I hope that despite how awful things look, you have things around you to keep you sane. Because that is the most important thing right now, I think. So, With that, I'm gonna get offline. I hope you have a good night, and I will see you next time. Bye.